The second point, as you can see, is the attitudes that we need to have. And I say attitudes it's got an S at the end, because it's not just one attitude, a positive attitude. There's certain attitudes that you have to be able to show, both in terms of what you say, in terms of how you say it, in terms of your body language, and also behavior. Behavior will be what you do. And there are some things that we're not going to have time to cover this evening, because they're somewhat time-consuming and involved. And I will be talking about them, just referring to them, but I'm not going to be covering exactly how to do it. And that is resumes, cover letters, social media, which is Facebook and sometimes Twitter, and also job interviews. I do some coaching and how to prepare for specific job interviews, but we're going to really just be talking about the basics. So anything that's beyond what we see up on this slide is going to have to wait for another time. Okay, now there's a phrase in English. It's called "keep your eye on the prize," and that is where you will be focused on a certain goal. And the goal here is you want to get a job that will provide for both short and long-term financial stability. Everybody wants to win the lottery. That's nice, but it's not very probable. What we want to do is we want to find something not only that's going to be kind of a short-term fix, but maybe something that is going to be long-term, where maybe you can get a better job after you get your first job. You can build and get promoted, or maybe go to a different company and take that experience that you have with one job and be able to sell that to another possible employer. And the second point here is it's one thing to get a job, but it's also a positive thing if you can get a job that is fulfilling. Everybody has their own talents. Some people have experience, and you want to, as we say, leverage that experience, to take that experience and use it in another organization or even in the same organization for a promotion. But if you have somebody who is, for example, somebody who is a very outgoing person, and you put that person in a back office somewhere, then that person is going to be frustrated. And that may not be the best job environment for that person. On the other hand, you take somebody who's very introverted and you put them in a job where they have to be out there selling. That's not going to be what we call a good fit. So that's another assumption that we have going into this. You have to be motivated. You have to be motivated to do certain things. Very often, we have to make certain adjustments, and we'll see that in a minute, where in order to support your family, you may take longer hours. It may take maybe commuting a little bit more than what you're used to in order to support one's family. Okay. As mentioned, many situations in life require an adjustment. And no new employment situation will be without any adjustments. I mentioned a couple of adjustments in terms of schedule, in terms of commute. Let's say if you're used to having a job, let's say you live in Brooklyn, and you don't necessarily want to restrict yourself to working in Brooklyn. Maybe there's going to be a good job in Queens or Manhattan or out on the island, and that may require a longer commute or taking the train or whatever it is. That you have to be open to that, because you don't want to give up on those good opportunities. And if you have family, then they need to be on board in order to allow you to do what you need to do. Okay. And sometimes you might need additional training, whether it's getting a certification or taking a class, or maybe even getting a degree. That is another type of adjustment that a person might need to do in order to what we call upskill. You have to upskill or upgrade your credentials in order to get to the next
webinar.
And finally, on this slide, we have that you have to be able to show an employer that you will be a valued asset to the organization. You have to sell the employer on the idea that by hiring you, they're going to save money. They're going to be more efficient. You have a certain talent or skill that doesn't exist in that work environment. And I heard a phrase that employers don't care how much you know. They care more about how much you care. Okay? They want to know how much you care about the job and about making them profitable, making them more efficient. So that's something to keep in mind. Okay. Now, I guess there's I think Pirkei Avos has this in Hebrew, know where you are at and where you're headed. And I think that in order to get your first in order to get your first job or your next job, I would recommend every so often.
Been there, talked to?
If somebody can, I hear some noise in the background. If whoever is talking, if you can mute yourself, that way we can kind of get through this without any distraction. The idea here is to not just look at the here and now or tomorrow, but see where you would like to be in 5 years. And sometimes they'll use that as an interview question, but I'm not even talking about that. I'm talking about to do, what they say, a cheshbon nefesh, to look every few years and see, am I doing the right thing in order to get onto my 5-year plan of where I'd like to be 5 years from now. So it's 2016. So where would I like to be by 2020, 2021? Do I want to be the vice president? Do I want to be a manager? Do I want to be a director? And see whether that makes sense or whether I need to do certain things in order to get me there. One of the things that I have on this slide is, would a mentor concur? And I believe in mentoring very much. Having a mentor, having someone that has been there, done that, somebody who has had success in that particular occupation, to be able to show you the ropes and give you some tips, and you check in with that person every so often, and that way you can make sure that you're on track. And finding the right mentor is not always easy, but that is, I think, something that's very important in terms of making sure that you're on track to where you need to be in the future. One of the areas that you will see on a job posting, and we'll talk a little bit about job postings and where to find them shortly, but one of the things that you'll see on any job posting is what sort of training or what we call credentials are necessary. Now, sometimes it might be a high school degree, but many jobs require a college degree, a bachelor's degree. Now, sometimes a yeshiva will grant a bachelor degree that will be accredited. That might be enough. But sometimes they're looking for not just a general degree, they're looking for things that are specific. Maybe if you're looking to get into phlebotomy, to draw blood, or sonography, or marketing, that might require a college degree or a course. And now is not the time to talk about all those options because it's a complicated topic. But I just want to put it out there that you may not qualify for a job if you don't have certain credentials. So, for example, if people are in IT, sometimes you'll see, or computers, you'll see on a job description, you need Microsoft certification or Cisco certification. Now, those aren't college degrees, but sometimes you can get those credentials, you can get those certifications by going to a community college, by going to Kingsborough, Queensborough, CUNY. They may have some programs that are part of the college but are not necessarily a degree, but are a certification that you can hand to an employer and say, I am Microsoft certified. I am certified in developing mobile apps, for example. Okay. Sometimes, if it requires a high school diploma, some people in our community don't have a high school diploma. There are options of getting a high school diploma even as an adult called the GED, a graduate equivalent degree, maybe for certain jobs that are hands-on, plumber, electrician. There can be some trade schools where you can get an apprenticeship. There might be, getting back to the first thing with certifications, some people might be interested in becoming a legal secretary. There's a certification for legal secretaries and paralegals. So this is a slide that really speaks to what you need, in not just in terms of experience, but sometimes the letters after your name or a diploma or a certificate in order to be qualified for a job. Another phrase, I mentioned the phrase before that employers don't care how much you know, they care about how much, they want to know how much you care. This is another phrase that you may have seen or you may have heard, and that is you don't get a second chance to make a first impression. And first impressions, whether we like it or not, are very strong, very powerful. If we meet somebody for the first time and they don't look neat, they look disheveled and schlumpy, then we have a certain impression about them. And it takes sometimes a lot of kind of repairing of that image in order to make you think of that person in a positive way. So it's not just how we look, but sometimes it's how we talk. Are we gracious? Do we say thank you? If somebody's giving us some time of theirs, do they have manners? There are herets. That's really all part of making a good first impression. So some of the things that you need to pay attention to is what I call written communication and work. And as we know, sometimes we write on paper, but many times today we're writing on a phone. When I say writing, not literally writing, but we're typing on a phone or we're typing an email, and that's really part of it. And if you are sending an email to somebody and it doesn't come across as polite or professional, you just jump into the email or you text somebody, it's not going to be a positive first impression. Your positive first impression, you should bend over backwards to be very polite and grateful for whatever the person is giving you, especially if you're applying for a job. And I mentioned electronic communication. It's funny, I have when my previous job that I was mentioning, the email address sometimes that people would send me emails from would be very kind of cutesy. So one guy was chollanteater@gmail.com. Okay, whether you like chollant or not, it's probably not a professional email address to use. So think about that is the very first impression when you contact somebody by email. They're going to see your email address, and if you have something cutesy, maybe save that for your personal email, but come up with Moshe Smith, Moshe Goldberg @gmail.com, Moshe.Goldberg, Moshe-Goldberg, whatever it is. It should be something that is neutral, that is professional. You maybe put some numbers in there. That's something I would strongly recommend, having a professional email address. Another thing, I mentioned social media. I'm not going to get into it that much right now, but for people that are looking for professional jobs, LinkedIn is a very commonly used business social media platform. And people post their picture, people post their resume, their experience and their credentials on LinkedIn, and then you start connecting with people, and you can join some groups. It's very powerful, and their job postings on LinkedIn. So that's something, if you're interested in the professional world, to have a solid presence. I was at a conference on Thursday of last week, and one of the services that the conference was offering was they had a professional photographer. I paid for the conference, and they, for a small fee, they would take a headshot of you for LinkedIn and other purposes. A professional photographer was there, and it doesn't necessarily, you don't necessarily have to pay anybody for a professional shot on LinkedIn, but I would recommend maybe not necessarily using a Hasana photo, but using something that is somewhat professional. Phone communication, it sometimes surprised me when people called me in my office and they didn't even introduce themselves by name. They would just jump in with a question. And I would kind of say, and who is this? Having basic phone etiquette, basic phone derech eretz, the way of the world is that you say, hello, my name is Esther Cohn. My name is Miriam Katz. I'm calling because I am interested in the position that you had posted. That's a very polite, appropriate type of opening on a phone call. And we're going to talk also, if you're the recipient of a phone call, because you may be using your cell phone number, if you might be getting a professional call from a job, from an employer, you might not want to pick up the phone if you're in a noisy place, because that is not going to allow for a serious, quiet conversation. You should let it go to voicemail, and then you should call back at a time. Listen to the message. Certainly, you want to listen to the message first and see if there's any details about when the best time to call back is. But you should be calling back at a time that is quiet and uninterrupted. When we meet people for the first time, if we're networking or certainly if we're on a job interview, we have to be aware of how we present ourselves. We have to present ourselves. Women should have their hair properly fixed. They should have, let's say, makeup. Men should be wearing a tie and a shirt. In most cases, maybe a suit or a sport jacket would be appropriate. Those are all things that are basics. Are basics when you are going on a job interview or you're going to a conference where you're networking with people. That is appropriate. We should be polite. I mentioned this before. I guess it's worth repeating. You should be appropriate. You shouldn't be what we call over the top. You can say thank you. You don't necessarily have to say thank you so much, thank you very, very much, because if you start overusing it, then it doesn't necessarily mean anything. So sometimes you just need to be a bit more brief. I don't know how many of you have heard of an elevator speech or an elevator pitch, but that's something that is an important skill to have. An elevator pitch or an elevator speech, the way that it came about is that you only have 30 to 45 seconds in an elevator to have a conversation with the person. You don't know when the other person is getting off. You might be getting off before or after that person. Having a good elevator speech, if you're introduced to somebody, let's say you're introduced to somebody at a kiddush or at a party, and your friend introduces you to that person because that person could be helpful in you finding a job. You should have something prepared. My name is Miriam Katz. I am a legal secretary for a law firm in Brooklyn, and I'm going back to school for my paralegal certificate, and I have experience in legal writing, and I'm looking for a position as a paralegal associate type of thing. That would be the notion, the gist of your elevator speech. I have here up on the slide the approach, which I have what we call the approach when you meet that person for the first time. You should have good eye contact, handshake, and then follow this. If you follow this formula, I mentioned the two expertise or focus areas. I mentioned one as an example, experience in legal writing, and then be ready to respond to that person's question. Oh, how many years of experience do you have? What kind of law have you done legal secretary work for? You should be prepared for that. sometimes at the very beginning of a job interview, the question will be, Malka, tell me about yourself. And that might be an opportunity to pull out some of your elevator speech. Now, it's not your uncle or your brother-in-law's job search anymore. What makes today's job search different than in the past? One of the main things is that most jobs, although networking is important, it's definitely important to network. I mentioned that before, and that's why it's good to have a solid elevator speech. But when looking for a job, a corporate job, most jobs are posted online. If you have a company, most companies today will have a website. On most websites of companies, there will be a list of jobs. It will say careers or jobs. That will be one place to look. There might be, there are rather, other what I call third-party sites and job boards. One is called linkup.com, which is different from LinkedIn, and also Indeed. Indeed is a very popular one because what Indeed does is it goes out on the internet and you put in search words. And if you put, I'm just using legal secretary as an example, you can put in really anything, and then you put your zip code in, and you can say, give me within 10 miles of my zip code or 25 miles of my zip code, and then it'll pull in all the jobs, and then you can see what jobs are, and you can apply through that. There's a kind of a neat mobile app that was founded by a from person, in fact. It's called Apploy. Apploy is used, it's something you put on your iPhone that's generally used for jobs, let's say in fast food restaurants. In many cases not kosher, but if the concept is an interesting one where it'll tell you based on where you're located, it'll tell you how many of these jobs in retail or sales might exist, and it'll tell you where they are. Okay. I mentioned networking, and by networking, remember that elevator speech that you told your friends contact at the Kiddush? A networked connection might come to fruition a day later, a week later, maybe 6 months later. But if you've made a positive impression like we talked about before, then that will stick in that person's mind, hopefully. And if they come across something, they'll come back to your friend. Let's say if they don't remember your name, oh, who was that friend of yours that was looking for a job as a legal secretary? I'd like to share that job with her. Can you give me that person's email address? Once again, you made a positive impression. You're able to leverage that network. And sometimes there might be email job lists that your friend or your professional contact will be able to let you know about. Sometimes you can subscribe. Sometimes they'll just forward it. And that's the power of networking. I mentioned before that we're not going to get into this in great detail, but I do feel that it's whatever resume you come up with, it's a good idea to have a current copy of your resume available. Sometimes you can put it on I have a little flash drive here. You can put it on a flash drive. You can put it in your email that you have. If you have internet access, you can access it. Because maybe you won't be in a place near your computer. But if you have internet access or if you have your flash drive with your resume on it, then that's going to be helpful. Because sometimes you don't want to be the last one to apply. It's better to be closer to the beginning of the applicants who apply. I mentioned before that a LinkedIn profile, I'm not going to go into that any more than what we have. When you prepare for an interview, I think one of the main pieces of advice that I give people is to find out as much about the company as possible. Sometimes you can look on the website. Sometimes you can talk to friends who work for the company or used to work for the company and try to get a lowdown on some of the people, the personalities, what kind of company is it? Is it a very formal environment, or is it informal, Heimesh? What is it? And do your research. Another piece of advice that I give people is to try to think about the 3 to 5 most important things about you that hopefully will come out in the interview. And you'll use some of the questions that are asked of you as an opportunity to put the 3 to 5 points on the table for the interviewer, for the interviewer. So let's say you have Microsoft certification, you have experience, I'm just looking in IT, for example, to change from legal secretary. So you have Microsoft certification, you have experience in mobile apps, and you know a certain computer language very well. Those would be your 3 things. So hopefully, throughout the interview, there'll be an opportunity for you to present not necessarily all 3 of them in the same answer, perhaps, maybe, but you want to keep those things in mind and make sure that they know that about you by the time the interview is over. So sometimes it's a little tricky because the question might not address those 3 to 5 points directly, but if you can creatively include them into your answer, then that will be helpful. At the very end of the interview, the most common question that will be asked of you is, do you have any questions of me? And if you say, oh, I don't have any questions, then it's going to show that you're not that interested. That's why it's always a good idea to have a few questions, a few good questions in your back pocket. I'll just give you a couple of examples. One example is this a newly created position or is it replacing somebody? Sometimes you'll know that, but sometimes you might not know that, and that's a very fair question because you want to know what you're getting yourself into. Another question is you shouldn't be asking questions about salary right away. That's a question you shouldn't ask. But a question that you might want to ask is the following. Let's say you hire somebody for this position. Maybe it'll be me, maybe it'll be somebody else. But if you fast forward the clock 12 months, a year from now, what would you hope that whoever you hired would, maybe the 2 to 3 things that they would have accomplished by then, or the 2 to 3 things that they would have done or changed or whatever it is. So what that does is it kind of shows that you're interested in what will make for a successful position, what will make for a successful hire for that position. It's a good question. It's one I recommend. I've used that myself, in fact, but that's another example. Once again, you should not be asking about salary and benefits. Sometimes you already know that, but your main point, at least in your first interview, is to get to the second interview. And the way that you do that is to show that you are a potentially valuable person for that company. There are practical considerations to make sure that you get there on time. Arrange for childcare, because you have to have somebody that's there in time for you to be able to get to where you need to be. So arrange for that ahead of time. Figure out how you're going to get there. I recommend that if you're going to drive, to have printed directions. Don't necessarily rely on GPS on your phone. Maybe your phone will lose power. So at least have a backup that's printed directions from MapQuest or Google Maps. Make sure you get a good night of sleep the night before, so you're not falling asleep. And try to be there 15 minutes ahead of time, because that will allow you to use the restroom to freshen up a bit, so that you're not just running into the interview. Maybe you can look around the office, not snoop, but you could just see how things are set up when you're in the waiting area. Maybe talk to the secretary a little bit, be friendly to the secretary or receptionist who's there, and then 15 minutes, it'll give you a chance to maybe review some of the information that you know about the company based on your research before you begin. And also turn off your phone. You should never be taking a call during the interview. What to bring? I mentioned before having a resume. You might want to bring a copy of your resume. Some people, let's say, who are into graphic design, you might have a portfolio, or maybe have a website that you can share the information of how to get the website that you can present at the meeting. You might want to have names and contact information for references. You can offer to that for that. So it's good to have it just in case you need it. Have a portfolio or a pen. So just give you a sense of what that looks like, a little show and tell. Just a simple portfolio, one that you can buy from Office Depot or get online from Amazon with paper inside, so that when you are sitting at the desk and they ask you a question, maybe you'll take some notes. Maybe it'll be a question with 3 or 5 parts to it. So what that allows you to do is to take some notes and formulate your answer so that you make sure that you answered the question. There's nothing that an interviewer finds more frustrating as I ask the question and the person just danced around the answer and didn't really tell me what I needed to know about that person. So that's one thing I would say to do. It's not a test or anything like that where it's closed book. It's I think it shows interest. If I'm sitting in an interview as an interviewer and somebody says, "Do you mind if I take notes?" I'm going to say, "Sure, of course," because there's no reason why they shouldn't take notes. And also make sure your cell phone is charged, mention the driving directions, and have the phone number of the person that's interviewing you just in case an emergency comes up. So you have that information, and don't call when you're 10 minutes late. If you see that you're in a traffic jam and there's no way you can get there on time, then maybe you call 20 minutes before the interview as a courtesy. What else to bring? I mentioned before that it's about both attitudes and behavior. And when you have a positive attitude, the positive attitude should be about this organization based on the research, as well as nobody wants to hear in an interview that you're bad-mouthing your previous boss or your previous employer. Because what happens if I hire you and then things don't work out? I don't want you bad-mouthing me and my company to anybody else. So even if you may not have had such a great experience in your last job, try to keep it very neutral and say maybe it wasn't the best fit for me. Okay, so you're not placing any blame on either yourself or certainly the other person. That's a good strategy to answer that question. And if you have a positive attitude, that's going to come through in terms of what you say and how you say it. Appearance. It is what I say is to have an appropriate appearance. Even if the working on the job is not going to be, if you see people there that are not necessarily wearing a suit and a tie, but still for the interview, it's kind of respecting the interview to err on the side of being a little bit more formal. That's a guideline there. Make sure your clothes are clean, pressed, clean-shaven, or neatly trimmed beard. Your shoes should be, you shouldn't be wearing sneakers or anything else informal. And other grooming. My mother always used to tell me the mirror is your best friend. Make sure that you look at yourself before you leave the house. And if you're there for 15 minutes, ahead of time, you can use the bathroom and make sure that everything is refreshed. Okay. Once again, you don't want to necessarily attract attention, and it really depends. If you're working in the Hasidic community in Brooklyn, so that's going to be a little bit of a different look than if you're working in Manhattan. And even though kind of everything goes, but you still want to be as professional as you can be. You don't want to attract undue attention. If you think about somebody who's got a lot of tattoos and body piercings, for example, so those tend to be a little bit distracting because they attract attention. So try to keep more of a professional demeanor. And find out what is considered to be appropriate for that particular business environment. And what are some common questions some common questions is, why are you interested in this job with our company? And hopefully, if you've done your research, like I said before, you can say something positive about the company. I heard it's a very it's a growing company, and this job, based on the job description, matches with my skill set and my experience, and I feel very positive about it. You might have questions about your past. Can you tell me about a time when you had to deal with a conflict? Or can you tell me about a time when you had to meet a very tight deadline? What did you do? Okay, and try to come up with some specific examples of what the situation was, what you did, and what was the outcome. And then there might be questions like, let's say, what we call hypotheticals. Let's say I was your manager, and I asked you if you could help me out on this particular project or to meet with this customer, and then somebody else in the office asked you to help them out. What would you do? That's what we call a hypothetical. And sometimes you have to know who's the boss, so to speak, and know who you're reporting to. So that would be an example of what we call a hypothetical question. And then is what we call a job knowledge question. You may have a question, how would you put together a PowerPoint presentation? Okay, that's a question that shows that you know PowerPoint, let's say. And if you say, well, the first thing I would do is figure out if there are any pictures that I need to use, and I'll download those pictures from the internet. And then I'll figure out whether my PowerPoint deck should have, whether it's going to be a longer presentation or a shorter presentation, and try to figure out the best way of putting together the slides. Okay, so that's step-by-step kind of instructions about how to do something, and that would be what we call a job knowledge test that would show that you know how to put together a presentation. Some other possible questions are going to be pretty direct questions. Can you tell me about any college that you've had, or any certifications or training? You might sometimes get a question, can you tell me about your strengths and weaknesses? That's always a difficult question to answer. Your strengths are easy, but how do you describe your weaknesses? So the conventional wisdom is to talk about, to recognize that you may have a weakness. Let's say if you have a weakness that you, when you write reports, your reports are too long, and you need to shorten them. So that's what you would say. You would say, one of the weaknesses that I have is I tend to be a little bit long-winded in my reports, but one of the things that I know I need to do is I need to work on getting more concise. Okay, so that's you're identifying your weakness. It's a reasonable weakness, and you show that you want to improve on that. So that's a way of kind of addressing a weakness. You might also get questions about your availability. When can you start? And that would be another type of question. When you are in the interview, once again, we're not going to focus that much on an interview, but I'm just giving you some of the very basics. I want to leave some time for some questions at the end. That would be having a firm hand eye contact, but that shows that you're paying attention, you're engaged. To sit up straight as opposed to being slouched over, to show that you're interested in the job and the organization, and sell yourself. Now is not the time when you're in an interview to be humble. You don't want to come across as a schlepper. You want to come across as somebody who has self-esteem, who's a gabra. That is, but you don't want to come across as being too arrogant either. So it's really a balance between self-confidence and humility. During the interview, make sure that you use the right titles and name pronunciations. If somebody has a difficult name, or you don't want to refer to somebody, let's say if it's a female who's a doctor, you don't want to call her Mrs. or Miss. You need to call her by her appropriate title. Try to answer questions with specifics. If, let's say you're a salesperson, and you don't want to just say I'm a good salesperson, I'm an excellent Cracker Jack salesperson. But you can say, last year I closed $300,000 in sales. Okay, so that shows a certain accomplishment. That's certainly better than 250 or 200. So that would be a way to answer a certain question. We talked about balancing humility with accomplishments. Show yourself as a flexible person, not as somebody who's very rigid. And of course, don't take a call or a text during the interview. Mention taking notes. Don't feel that you need to be rushed into answering questions. You took some notes, and maybe take a few seconds before you answer. You're not going to get any more points by answering quickly, and you're not going to have any points deducted from your answer by taking a few seconds. Now, you don't want to take 10 or 20 or 30 seconds, but certainly if you want to pause, that is acceptable. Remember the 3 to 5 points that we talked about earlier, and try to use proper English. We have in the English language, there are words that are known as filler words. Sometimes you hear people saying, like. Those don't really have any meaning to them. They're just used to fill space, to fill time. And it takes a long time to work on those things, but if you can avoid using those words, it comes across as more authoritative and sophisticated. Sometimes you'll have more than one interviewer, and that's called a panel interview, and make sure that you give eye contact to each person on the panel. You may want to jot down who's sitting where so that you can maybe mention their name before you answer a question of theirs. Religious issues. Now we know we're coming up on Pesach this coming Friday night. We have different schedules. We have holidays. We have other sometimes obligations. And I would say that if you are somebody who keeps Shabbos and I'm talking about where you're applying for a job with a non-Jewish or non-firm company. Obviously, if you're applying for a job with a Jewish company, they may know you may know them. But if you're looking for a job outside, you don't necessarily want to put it out there that you're religious and you can't work after 12 o'clock on Friday or something like that. You want to make sure that you first prove yourself and then maybe come back with that later in the process. Don't put it front and center because once again, you want to make sure that you know that they know that you care about their needs as an employer. Okay. Following up, after the interview, within a day or so, you should definitely be sending some sort of follow-up email, thanking them for the opportunity to present. If they ask you to send, let's say, a copy of your certification or college transcripts or references, make sure that you take care of that promptly after the interview. And also, make sure that you check your email and voicemail. Maybe they'll call you back for a second interview. Maybe they'll tell you that you didn't get the job. You don't want to necessarily call them before you give them a certain amount of time to get back to you. But monitor your voicemail and email. Sometimes you need to be patient. They have other people that they're looking at. Sometimes what sometimes happens is that they will wait to contact you until not only they've made an offer, not only that the person has been hired or even started working, but they are confident the person will work out because they don't want to necessarily close the door on anybody who is interested until they are convinced that this person will work out. So it's possible that you might not hear back from them for a while, but it's definitely appropriate to follow up after a couple of weeks. Okay, I want to leave a little bit of time. I don't know how many people are on the call. I have some people here. I think I have somebody by the name of Esther, and I have somebody by the name of Viewer 11. I'm not sure if that's me or if that's somebody else. But if you can hear me, let me just take a look and see if there were any questions. No questions in the chat room. It looks like I have maybe a Celica Esther, and a Gittel. Anybody else? Maybe not.
I see Jack and Leah going.
Okay. Yes, you can write questions in the chat box. Or you can, I think you can, if you have a microphone, I think you'll be able to ask a question. Make sure my microphone is on. Okay, my volume is up. I should be able to hear a question, but I can definitely see questions in the chat box. Let's see. All right, hold on a second. I didn't do anything there.
Esther and Leah, I heard you guys before, so we'll be able to hear you if you talk.
Mindy, I see your lips moving, but I can't hear you. Do I have to do anything on this? Let's see. Hold on. Audio. Self. I don't want to mute myself. Screen sharing has been paused. Audio is still being recorded, but I can't hear anybody.
Okay.
You can hear me, Mindy?
Yeah.
You can hear me, but I can't hear you. What do I need to do?
Is anyone talking?
What do I need to do? I don't want to mute myself.
I
heard you before. Microphone, video. Okay.
I just unmuted it.
Oh, can you guys hear us?
I hear you.
So we sent
sent a question.
Leah sent a question via chat.
Dr. Lasson, do you hear?
Can you put it in the... Esther, are you talking? I think I can hear you. Maybe put it into the chat box. I don't know why it's not...
We put one on the chat box.
My volume up. Can you think of anything I need to do in the chat box? I can see Esther. Okay, here we go. I see a question. How would you suggest refusing a handshake from the opposite gender of an interview? How would you suggest refusing a handshake? So the question, I'm not sure if I understand the question exactly. Who is the interviewer and who is the interviewee? Who's the one doing the interview?
Someone's interviewing me.
Well, let me say this. Let me say this about handshakes and interviews. Maybe this will answer your question. When it comes to, and I'm just going to give you the way that I was raised and I was informed in yeshiva, and that is there are a wide range of opinions about whether it would be okay to shake the hands of an interviewer who is of the opposite gender. So let's just say, for example, I am the interviewee and the interviewer is a female. And the female puts out her hand. So what would I do? My tradition has been that it is okay to do that. There are other opinions that are more stringent. Now, it's really a broader question, because if the handshake is kind of indicative of a persona where you're very standoffish, then that's going to show in other areas. If it's just the hand, I'll use kind of like we say in Shiva, if it's just a handshake, then you might be able to kind of say, for religious reasons. But you have to make up for that through other things that you do to show that you are a hard worker, that you will help, whether it's a male or a female, in other ways on the job. Okay? So it's definitely, I'm going to say it's definitely a lot easier if you do shake the person's hand. Once again, it's kind of a broad question, but I would just say there's a range of opinion. Okay, fine. Another question: how do you deal with having the right skills? And a lot of it is on a case-by-case basis, so I'm just trying to speak as generally as possible. How do you deal with having the right skills for a job, but not having the qualifications as the right degree that they originally asked for? Okay. So that is, that's where we get into the training and certification. If the reason for your question is that you're in an interview and they're asking you about that, then the fact that they called you in for an interview, then that shows that there might be something about your experience that at least puts you in the ballgame. If you were not called in for an interview, then maybe they say, we need somebody with the degree, and you're not going to get called. But if you don't have the degree on your resume and they still call you in, then I think you still have a chance. Otherwise, they wouldn't have contacted you. But I would say that maybe that you could put that as one of your weaknesses, or it may come up in the interview. I realize that I don't have a college degree, but once I do find my next job, perhaps if it's this one, I will be willing to go back to school in order to update my skills. So that would be something. Usually, if you've gotten the interview, then it shows that you at least have a chance. Do you think it's worth at least applying at all? Sometimes a job posting will say college degree preferred or certificate preferred. If they say preferred, then I think you still have a chance. If they say it's required, then it might not be worth applying at all. And I apologize, I don't know why I can't hear the questions, but at least I see it in the chat box. So, are there any other questions? Okay. I think that if there are no other questions, we can kind of call it a night. If you have any questions that come up that you can think of after tonight's session, any specific questions such as these, I'm happy to weigh in on them. If you send them to Mindy, she will get me those questions, and then I will address them and get back to you. Okay? I don't know who's in the background. Somebody's hiding in the background there. Behind you. Hi. Okay. Okay. So that's I guess that's all I have to say, and everybody should have a what did my Rav used to say? He used to say everybody's going to have a Freilichem Purim, but after all the cleaning, it's also good to have a Freilichem Pesach too. You should go into the Seder not just tired, but also happy about what you're doing. Okay. All right. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you so much.